everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Resilient Power in Schools, featuring Florida and New Jersey. This webinar is being brought to you by Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a quick housekeeping slide. All of our participants today are in listen-only mode. You can tune in to the audio portion of this webinar using your computer speakers or a headset, or you can call in using your telephone. Today we are encouraging all of our webinar participants to please type your questions into the question box on your webinar console. You can type your questions in at any time during today's broadcast, and we will queue up your questions and answer them as time allows at the end of the webinar. So again, please do submit your questions as you think of them, and don't wait until the end of the webinar to submit your questions. Also, I would like to point out that this webinar is being recorded. You'll find a recording of this webinar as well as all of our previous Resilient Power webinars online at the web addresses that you see on your screen. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is our Resilient Power Project Director at Clean Energy Group, and he is going to be the host for today's webinar, and he will be introducing our guest speakers and talking a bit more about our topic today. And Todd, please go ahead. Todd, I think you'll need to unmute.
The delay, we have had a couple of technical glitches, but I think we're good now. Samantha, I'll just use my phone to mute myself rather than the screen, which doesn't work very well. So, welcome everybody to our Resilient Power webinar for today. I, again, apologize for the delay. We have a very interesting program, and it's actually turned out to be quite popular. We have more than 100 attendees on this webinar, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions, or as many as we can, following the presentations. The Resilient Power program is run by Clean Energy Group and funded by a number of foundations that you see on the screen there. You can go ahead to the next slide, Samantha. And the purpose of the Resilient Power Project is to support efforts in states, municipalities, and by developers and facility managers to deploy resilient power systems at critical infrastructure. And what that means is to put clean, distributed generation and storage systems at facilities that are critical, especially in times when the grid is down, for example, in a natural disaster, and that allowing those facilities to be able to continue to provide services to the community during those times when otherwise they would have no power. So you can see on your screen we do publish a number of reports and studies. They're all available on our website along with our blogs, and we have a newsletter that goes out monthly. Please feel free to visit our website and sign up. These are all free and available. Next slide, please. So today we have a number of guest speakers from two different places. We have from Florida, John Leeds and Susan Schleith, and they're going to talk about a program that has put solar and storage systems at more than 115 public schools in state of Florida, and these are schools that are designated as shelters specifically for hurricanes. And by doing this, these shelters are now provided with electricity when the grid goes down and the community needs the shelter to be up and running. And we also have a speaker from the company AF Mensah, which is a private firm that develops solar and storage resilient power systems. And so I'm going to introduce everybody very briefly. Then we will begin with John and then Susan from Florida, and then we'll turn it over to Avital Schultz from AF Mensah, and I'm told that we also have a number of other folks from Mensah joining us for the questions and discussion after the presentation. So I want to introduce first John Leeds, Senior Management Analyst of the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Office of Energy. John's been with the Office of Energy since 2008. in program development and administration as it relates to renewable energy technologies. He also acts as the liaison for the Florida Energy Systems Consortium, which is an energy research consortium of the state's public universities. I also want to introduce Susan Schleif. She's Communications and Education Manager with the Florida Solar Energy Center. She directs the center's education programs and also manages the SunSmart Schools Emergency Shelter Program, which is the program I mentioned that we're going to be looking at today. This was a $10 million statewide effort to install solar electric panels on schools along with battery systems and to provide curriculum and instruction to faculty within those schools. And so we're going to start with John Leeds, and I'll turn this over to him and then go to Susan thereafter. John?
Okay, good. Thank you for having me this afternoon. Today, as we mentioned earlier, I'll go ahead and be covering the SunSmart Schools e-Shelters program from the state's perspective. So let's see if I get the slides here. There we go. Real quick, I'll go ahead and do a brief overview of the Office of Energy and its role here in Florida. We are a non-regulatory office, and we work on policy and programs mainly. So we are a legislatively directed policy development office within Florida, and we also look at studies. We produce an annual report, and part of what we do is we develop programs that align with our role here, and that's where the SunSmart Schools program comes into play. So we are an office of about 14 people, give or take, depending on the time that you ask that question. But so we aren't a very large office, but we seem to get things done. So this program came about from some original programs that we had. We worked with the Florida Schools, and then the SunSmart Schools program, which was a 2-kilowatt PV system, and that did not have battery backup. So in 2009, the Office of Energy received its first award from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We received about $126 million from the state energy program funds to develop various energy efficiency and renewable energy programs. As a side note, at that time we were actually housed in the Office of the Governor, and then we were moved in 2011 into the Department of Agriculture. So during this time, the Office of Energy was busy developing various programs to administer the ARRA funds, and we decided to go ahead and put $10 million into the SunSmart Schools e-Shelters program to build on the success of the original SunSmart Schools program that was done in 2006 and 2007. The Office of Energy has emergency management responsibilities, and in 2004 and 2005, if anybody listening was in Florida, we had several tropical storms and hurricanes roll through the state, and it wreaked havoc on us. So we decided to go ahead and add the emergency management function, or the battery backups, to the schools at that time. And we actually, the office here, actually serves as, on the emergency management, we are part of ESF 12, and that's emergency support function. So in Florida there are many ESFs, as we call them, emergency support functions. So for instance, the National Guard has its own ESF, and ESF 12 handles electricity and fuel. So we did already have an existing relationship with the Department of Emergency Management, which helped us access information regarding where the shelters were and things of that nature. One thing in Florida is we have regional coordinators for emergency shelters, so it was somewhat difficult to actually track down individual sites and which ones were the most active and the most often used, because we wanted to target those, because that's all held at the local level. So there were several reasons why we went down the road to support this program, and the first really was looking at saving money in schools, so saving energy cost. And a conservative estimate on this one is about $200,000 a year, which equates to about $1,800 per school. And if you do the math, that obviously has a long payback, so that wasn't the only reason we were looking at. Again, this is emergency management, and this is kind of something we were looking at as a way to see how this works and see if this would, be something that works in the future. To date, we haven't had any shelters that have been activated, which is a good thing. But when that does occur, seeing that we're in Florida, and it probably will at some point, these systems will provide critical loads. And as you can see on the slides there, it's not going to power the entire school because these are 10 kilowatt systems, but it'll still allow for operation of charging laptops or cell phones and things of that nature, operating fans and things like that. So it'll help the emergency shelters go ahead and keep on moving along. So some other reasons here were education was a pretty big component to this project, and over 450 teachers and facilities managers were trained through this program. And then it also provided educational kits to each school, and these kits include little PV panels and motors, milliamp meters, and things like that, and it helps with hands-on STEM education for students. And it also helps the teachers because it's giving them some curricula to build off of, which is in line with the state's requirements. And with the teachers, there was significant training that went into the actual curriculum material, so they knew how to work it, so they didn't just show up with a kit. But it also had a component for facilities managers, so they can benefit from learning more about how to maintain this technology, and this technology obviously becoming more prevalent, so it actually ends up helping them in the long run too. Another component which became more and more important as this project went along was actually the data that we can gather from this. So first of all, the data was used in the EnergyWiz website to incorporate into the curricula that was passed out. And then this is kind of the component that came in later, was more looking at from a research perspective of having all these identical systems geographically spread out throughout the state, and being able to get this data and look at different types of modeling, forecasting, and things like that for solar. And then finally, this is part of what ARRA was out there for, is to create jobs. I mean, everyone knows that those were bad times of years for jobs, and as you can see, the employment rate in Florida jumped significantly. So this particular project was able to support construction jobs and administrative jobs, and then also with the Buy American provisions of ARRA, the inverters and things like that were all coming from American companies. This was a large-scale project, and as such, it had many obstacles and learning experiences. One of the main ones was permitting, and this was something that actually we picked up across several of our statewide projects that we had, and permitting was a major issue across jurisdictions, and the differences between permitting requirements in different counties and school districts made it very difficult. And luckily, the contractor was able to actually change around their schedule to fit permitting delays, and it helped in that aspect. Another one, we were educating students and teachers and things like that, but we left out school officials, district officials, facilities managers, and things like that, and it created problems in some areas, which I'm sure Susan may touch on a little bit. But some school districts, there were individuals that thought solar panels are going to explode and they're unsafe for to be around kids and things of that nature. So it's something that we learned when you're doing a project of this size and putting these solar panels with battery backup systems throughout the state, that there's some misconceptions out there that you can look at beforehand and try to mitigate. And then this program came out to be pretty successful, and the utilities are actually still pushing forward with installations on their own. And then we as an office have actually purchased more educational kits to send out to teachers and try to hit some of the schools that actually didn't get the systems, but maybe they can benefit from the educational component. Also with ARRA and the federal funds that we used, there were a lot of compliance issues that came along with it, and two of those were Davis-Bacon, which since this was in multiple counties, it created a very large amount of paperwork to go through because every county has a different wage decision, and it held up the project overall time-wise. And then Buy American was difficult to a certain extent, and that was just basically looking for the right components and making sure we had that. And then in the schools, this is similar to the permitting, is that each school has badging, different badge requirements and schedule requirements. So this was something difficult to deal with because the contractor had to deal with each county and jurisdiction in order to get the proper clearance and time to work at the schools, and they all had different requirements, so that did make it difficult as well. And then back to data monitoring, we didn't realize the importance of this until later, and we were able to add in more robust data loggers towards the end of the project so that we could report on the data from these systems, and this will also come in handy during emergency situations because we're going to be able to see what these systems are producing and how they're operating as well. So, looking forward in the next year or two, to go ahead and get some of that data back and see how these systems are working, and then if these shelters are activated, we'll be able to follow through and go ahead and see how they're working out. So from the state's perspective, this has been a successful project. We have well over over 115 of these schools throughout the state, and as everyone knows, hurricanes frequent, and so far we're happy that we haven't had to activate these systems, but when we do, we will have after action report to see how well it was used and how well it worked out. So, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off on to Susan now.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
John. While we're turning this over to Susan, I just want to remind everybody we do have a large number of people attending this webinar, and I'm already getting questions. So please enter the questions as they occur to you. Don't wait till the end. We'll do our best to get to them, or as many as we can. Okay, Susan, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Terrific.
So, well, I work at the Florida Solar Energy Center, which is part of the University of Central Florida. It's a Type 1 research institute, and the research areas that we focus in on are photovoltaic, solar thermal, hydrogen, buildings efficiency, and alternative fueled vehicles. In fact, the Solar Energy Center had one of the very first research projects on the zero energy homes, and also we are an electric vehicle research center. So what I want to review really is how the SunSmart program got started. I'll give you a little bit of information about the entire eShelter program, and again, accomplishments, the things that we've learned, and hopefully where we're going to go in the future. I put Hurricane Andrew down here because that really was the first time we deployed a standalone portable PV powered with battery backup system. We ended up, research engineers, going down to Homestead and powering a little migrant medical facility. And what we found was it was very, very well received and did the job actually more reliably than the utility did. So that was kind of our first experience, and then from there we got the Million Solar Roofs program got started at the federal level. Because of Hurricane Andrew, Florida came up with more robust building codes, and that led into the PV on Schools program. In 2004, when the huge 4 hurricanes hit, it was basically devastated a lot of what was happening in Florida. But the PV on Schools program that got started in 2003, we built on that with the SunSmart Schools program and actually implemented the very first eShelter school, which was at Middleton High School in Tampa. This was also very well received, and we thought if we could just get this program going on a bigger scale, we could do incredible things here in Florida. So the goals of the program, and these are the overall arching goals that we basically brought to John Leeds' attention. We wanted to generate clean electricity using photovoltaics. We wanted to have the emergency shelter component. My focus was really on educating the teachers and the students, because I felt that if we could educate students and teachers, we could get more solar. As the students grow older, we would have a consumer that understood the technology as well as creating jobs in Florida. And of course, the other benefit is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And sometime during that process of the evolution of SunSmart, when Charlie Crist was governor, he actually had a global climate change conference down in Miami, and that was also very well received. And the PV on Schools program, the SunSmart Schools program, was actually highlighted during that conference. So here are key players in the program. And that FDAX at the top there, that's John Leeds, and he kind of was in charge of making sure that the Solar Energy Center was doing what it was supposed to do. We had the solar contractors, and in fact, many contractors throughout the state of Florida were involved. We had to have cooperation from the utilities so that we could have interconnection agreements with every single school. The emergency management organizations, they provided the insight into which schools actually had what we called enhanced hurricane protection area shelters. So within that school, there was an area that was more solid, that would withstand hurricanes, so we focused on those schools. And then we also had the schools as partners. And really the schools presented the largest challenge, because throughout the state of Florida, each school district, even each school, had their own set of rules. And as John mentioned, I'm not going to go into this too much, but we were ARRA funded, and so that created a whole list of requirements that we had to follow. So here were the regions in Florida that were actually addressed. And we have schools, as you can see, in each of those areas. We worked with the emergency management folks and made sure that we had schools that were in areas demographically that would be used as shelters, also in areas of high need, and we wanted to make sure we hit the areas that got hardest hit. And so you'll see quite a few schools that are in the west central part of Florida, and that's where several of the hurricanes kind of went through. We also got hit down by north of Miami back in 2004. So the way we selected the schools, we had an online application process, and then we had an external review committee look at each one of those applications. We had over 300 applications come in, and we looked to the emergency management people at the state level. We had someone from a group called the Florida Solar Energy Research and Education Foundation, the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the Florida Department of Education had two representatives, one in the Architectural and Engineering Department, and the other one who was basically just looking at schools and curriculum. We wanted to make sure, too, that we had teacher commitment and we had administrative school support. And we required every school or the school board member, the principal or the superintendent to sign. When we selected the solar contractor, we did an invitation to bid because we basically had in mind what that particular system was going to look like, and it was lowest bid that meets all the requirements would win. We also required that they would have to bid by region. So going back to those emergency management regions, if they bid one school, they had to bid all the schools in that particular region that had applied and were selected. We provided them with technical specifications. The solar contractors had to provide us with drawings that were reviewed by our engineers even before their bid was accepted. We ended up with over 40 invitation to bid responses, and eventually we got it narrowed down to one solar contractor. Initially we had hoped that we would have more than one, but as it turned out, Vergona Bauer Sox won that particular bid. Because of the time frame of the project, they were hard-pressed to get everything completed, so they used 4 solar subcontractors to help them get all the systems installed. And they also used other contractors, to put in the fencing. We actually coordinated with each of the schools to get the interior wiring of the critical loads completed. So here's basically what the PV shelter system was comprised of. So we had the 10 kW photovoltaic system, which was supposed to be one massive footprint. We had 25 kW of battery backup, which isn't a lot, and we really wanted to do more than that. And in fact, John had been hoping that we would get extra funding to be able to do that through the utilities, but that didn't actually happen. These were also, grid connected. We had net metering and the data monitoring. So here's basically what that system kind of looks like in a nutshell. And with the school. So what the Florida Solar Energy Center had to do is we went into each school and we identified first where the shelter was located in that school, because not every school, not the whole building is a shelter. It might just be the cafeteria. It might be one wing of the building. So we went within those particular areas, and then we would identify the critical loads that we would wire to the battery. And then those areas were identified with labels and with some sort of color coding so that everybody knew flipping that switch meant that that light should be coming on even if there was no power in that building because the batteries were providing that juice. So here are several examples of what some of the systems look like. The initial battery enclosure was a shed, and that was unacceptable to several of the schools, school districts within the state of Florida. So we ended up, partway through the program having to come up with another kind of enclosure. And this metal enclosure ended up being designed, which made to order. So that also created more jobs as well in Florida. So you can see it's open there, and you can see the outback inverters. You can see the batteries. And I don't know if you can see the data monitoring system, but it's there as well. If you can see at the top there is one of the sensors for the data monitoring system. In some cases, we couldn't do a single footprint, and we would have to, accommodate based on the school. This is the site where you can go get the data pages. It also has other activities and lessons and links for each school. Whoops. Here is the data page, the energywiz.com website. So if you wanted to look at the data here, you would go to the right, you would click on Select a School, and you would be able to draw down a menu. And in this case, I selected, say, Bayside High School. So this is the location of it. And then this would be what you would see if you brought up the Also Energy screen. Originally, the Solar Energy Center was going to do its own data monitoring, do its own website. We ended up using Also Energy because they provided kind of an array of services, and they've been really wonderful with work and being very responsive. So what we've accomplished, one thing we did was we got more people working in Florida. We hired many electricians throughout the state of Florida to do that interior wiring. 5 solar companies were put to work, subcontractors throughout the entire state of Florida. There were unique jobs that were created. We also, at the time, the Space Center had many layoffs because of the space station program shutting down. So we worked with the Florida Solar Energy Center, also had a program called the Southeast Solar Training Network. And we trained some of those workers to come and be helpers at some of these solar installations. So that was also a success. So as of today, we have 117 PV systems with battery backup installed. We've done all these workshops. We've reached all these teachers and all these students. And really what happens is every year we're hoping that this is just going to continue to grow, continue to build. And the collaborations that we've created throughout the state of Florida, especially with the utilities, and what we're doing now is trying to work with the facility managers, get them trained. This was an example of some of the modules that were created with the webinar. So the facility managers, if there's any kind of changeover at the school, they can go online to this particular page and they can click on any of these modules and they can learn about their PV system at their school. And what we found is a lot of the teachers are using this as well as the students. We held the 12 teacher workshops, and we not only covered photovoltaic technology, we also went into solar thermal and hydrogen technology as well, because we see this as an opportunity to sort of look to the future and also do a lot of STEM education. Here's an example of what is in a kit, a middle school solar kit. You'll notice there's photovoltaic cells, and there is a curriculum that goes along with this, and as well as going online to the data page. So a couple other things that I think are really wonderful that happened as a result of this program. Well, one of the schools actually created a semester program where every Friday the entire school would do solar activities. And that meant that every teacher in that school had to understand solar. And that's just one school. We have examples of that all over the state. Well, the Energy Whiz Olympics is something that we do at the Solar Energy Center, and a lot of the teachers that participated in these workshops wanted to have hands-on opportunities for students to really do project-based learning and then demonstrate what they've learned. So we have the Energy Whiz Olympics that we hold. It's usually the first weekend in May, and students come with all their projects. So here's an example of a solar-designed PV-powered house that the students did, and a junior solar sprint car. And here are two of our dedication ceremonies. We had many dedication ceremonies. The first one that we held was in Key West, and the last one that we held, the official one that we held, was in Haines City, at Haines City High School in Polk County. So lessons learned. If I could do this all over again, I would take an entire year just to educate all the people that were decision makers in the process. What we found were, in some places, it was the school board members who didn't understand how solar worked. In some places, it was a facility manager who didn't understand. So it would be key to really identify those people that really need to understand, bring them in, help them to be cooperative members of the process and really feel like this is their program. And we didn't really have the time to do that as much as we would have liked to. And again, you know, everybody's heard this, effective communication is vital. And that means listening and responding and not waiting days to get something resolved, but, you know, being really Johnny on the spot and getting back to people and making sure that everybody is understanding that we are doing our best. And then the other thing is, every school in the state of Florida has its own rules, and sometimes they don't even make sense. But you have to kind of obey by their rules because you're in their campus. You're at their campus. This is the way they do things, and you might not understand it or whatever, but you've got to do it. So where we go from here, right now we're completing 5 more schools. We've got 4 that we're working on for Duke Energy, and we're completing 1 for Tampa Electric. Once those are completed, we will have completed 122 schools, and it looks like Duke Energy and TECO want to do another round of schools, so that would mean 10 more for Duke Energy and 1 more for Tampa Electric. We are working with a group of teachers over the summer to refine the solar curriculum so that it is easier to see how the standards fit with our curriculum. So teachers don't have to do any guesswork. They can meet all those testing requirements that they have at the schools, and it's going to resolve their issues, but it helps us help people understand about solar technology. We'd like to provide more professional development opportunities for teachers and facility managers, and hopefully develop some courses for emergency managers as well. The other issue is fine-tuning that data collection. We're still working on that. We still have issues with the schools. Some of the schools will shut down for the summer, and they forget that they have a data monitor that's collecting information for us, and somehow or other they'll just shut it down. So we've got to figure out a better way to get those things resolved. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan and John. That was terrific. We have a number of questions, but as I said, we're going to go ahead with the second presentation, and we will get to as many questions as we can after that's done. I should say right now that we did get a little bit of a late start because we had some technical problems, so we're going to go a little bit past the hour. So if you're listening and you're waiting for us to get to your questions, we will do our best, and we'll go a little bit past 3 o'clock. So I want to introduce Avital Schultz from AF Mensah. She's a project manager with expertise in thermodynamic modeling, electric trading, algorithm design, and sustainable practices. She has prior experience with demand response operations in deregulated markets and a background in chemical engineering. She's going to be talking about what her company is doing in New Jersey at the moment at some schools, and it's a slightly different approach. Rather than relying on grants, it relies on new market opportunities that are emerging in the PJM, have emerged, I should say, in the PJM service territory, which includes a number of states, New Jersey among them. So, Avital, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. So just a little bit of background on AF Mensah. We're an energy company that seeks to partner battery storage technology with solar systems. So with traditional solar, when the sun is shining, the system will generate cheaper and cleaner electricity for the site. Now the site can actually use that electricity, or if we put a battery there, it could actually store the whatever electricity was generated in the battery to be sold later in the day when electricity prices are higher. So as electricity prices peak over the course of the day, the battery will be used optimally to discharge the generation that's stored in the battery to monetize that electricity. And then additionally, when there is a power outage, that battery can switch from its electricity market participation mode to its backup power mode so that it would actually serve the site's load during a grid outage. And so now we see that batteries actually offer two benefits to the site. First, that additional revenue stream, and then second, that backup power capability. And so, skipped a slide. And so when we develop a project, there's a pretty simple process we have to go through. So we'll locate a site and a customer that has the need for backup power, and we'll work with that customer to identify its critical loads. AF Mensah will then engineer a project and install the system at zero upfront cost to the customer. So what the customer will pay will be a power purchase agreement rate similar to traditional solar systems, where you'll be paying for all the electricity generated by the solar asset and the battery. And then the batteries will also enjoy additional revenues from their PJM market participation, and this additional revenue will be used to pay for the incremental cost of the battery. So just to look at some of the numbers for cost and revenue generated by these systems. So taking as an example a 1 megawatt solar plus storage project, a capital cost for this kind of project is about $3.5 million. And then there will be an investment tax credit granted that's approximately $1 million. And then for the revenues, there are 3 different streams. We have the money made through the power purchase agreement. We have the money made through the SREC market, the solar renewable energy credit market, and then we also have the PJM revenues. So the PPA and the SREC revenues, those are also seen in traditional solar. However, the PJM revenues are where the battery comes in. And as you see in this case, it actually doubles the revenue made per year for this project. And this results in a relatively short payback period of 4 years. So as we said, each site will have different load requirements and different energy requirements. But in general, for a commercial site, we'll use our 30 and 100 kilowatt systems, and we'll work with them as building blocks to build whatever size battery that the site needs. And these batteries can be located indoors or outdoors. And typically speaking, we use batteries with durations ranging from 30 minutes to 2 hours. But again, this is very customizable, and we can extend that if needed. And then all AF Mensah systems are turnkey plug-and-play systems that we develop and then we install at the site. And additionally, we also operate those systems using our proprietary software once they are installed. And this software is located in the cloud, so all operation is done remotely. And then just as a comparison to school systems, we're actually working on 2 projects with schools, one in southern Jersey and one in central Jersey. Our one in southern Jersey will be a new project, so there is no solar there, and we'll be putting 500 kilowatts of solar plus 500 kilowatts of battery storage. And these batteries will be half-hour batteries. And we're looking to complete this project by the end of 2015. And then in central Jersey, we'll be doing a retrofit project. So that's to say there's already solar on site, about 6 megawatts worth of solar PV, and we'll be adding 1 megawatt of battery storage technology there, again using 30-minute batteries. And we also hope to complete this project by the end of 2015. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Todd. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're ready to go to questions now. I believe we have a couple other folks on the line that I didn't introduce, so I'd like to do that quickly now. We have Drew Adams of AF Mensah. He's the head of strategy and partnership with expertise in regulatory and structured financing of solar storage, distributed generation, and demand response. And we have Peter Mensah, also of AF Mensah. He's the head of engineering with expertise in smart grid technologies, renewables, storage, energy trading, and utility operations. And I believe we also have Ajay Mensah, the founder of the company, on the line. So feel free, all of you, to jump in. We'll start with a sort of basic question. I think considering that these systems are being installed at least, in a large part as a resilient power system that's supposed to provide services to the facility during a natural disaster. The question is, what happens to the solar panels in a hurricane or a storm, and are there any special precautions required to protect the panels from severe storm damage, excessive heat, or other environmental concerns? So let's start with Florida, and then Mensah, if you want to speak to that.
I can jump on real quick. You can go ahead, Susan.
No, well, I was just going to say that one of the things that we did when we did the invitation to bid, the systems had to meet all the building codes, which means the systems had to withstand up to 150 miles per hour wind gusts. And generally we find that the systems have withstood hurricane wind forces really well in Florida. And John, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, the only other thing I was going to add is that most of the time these shelters, while they're built to withstand direct hits, most of the time they're activated on more of the outskirts of the storms. So we try to funnel people away from the storm into these shelters from the direct impacts. But yeah, like Susan was saying, they're built up to the codes, which are pretty significant here in Florida.
Okay, great. I'm assuming that that's also the case in the New Jersey area. Given that a lot of this came out of experiences with Hurricane Sandy's, impact in the Northeast, that these systems are designed to withstand that kind of those kinds of winds.
Yes,
they are. You there? Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. So next question, I think, is for the Mensah folks. Actually, a couple of questions. What types of batteries are being used? What does it mean when you refer to a 30-minute battery? And what's the life cycle expectancy and both for New Jersey and Florida? So let's start with Mensah. What are you using, and what's a 30-minute battery, and what's the life cycle expectancy?
So we're using lithium-ion batteries for now. And when I say a 30-minute battery, I mean that if it's used at full power rating, the battery will last, and consecutively, the battery will last 30 minutes. So if you have a 30 kilowatt battery and you use it at 30 kilowatt power for 30 minutes, the battery will deplete. Or if you had a 2-hour battery, the same thing. If you used it straight for 2 hours, the battery would also deplete.
Okay, and the life expectancy of those batteries?
Our systems should last 10 years.
Okay. And what about the batteries in the Florida schools? Are those lithium-ion?
No, they're not. Those were in the original ITB. We said that they would be deep cycle, sealed with captive inaccessible electrolyte. Those have a 5-year warranty, which was required as part of the ITB. Although most of these batteries are seeming to last longer than 5 years.
Okay, great. Here's another question for Avital. Does the California ISO approach PJM yet on market participation and payments? Or is that still something that we're expecting to see in the future? In other words, would the 4-year payback in PJM be a longer payback in California or something shorter or the same? Do you have any idea about that?
I'm actually unsure exactly. The markets work slightly different. I'm not sure if the payback period would be exactly the same or not.
Yeah, hi, Avital. This is Drew Adams. I can elaborate on that. So there are similar markets in California as there are in PJM. However, the dynamics of those markets are different, as well as the pricing for different services you can provide. So it would be a different financial scenario in California as opposed to PJM. And at this point in time, the market participation, so the direct ISO participation with batteries, from our research, it's not as lucrative in California as it is in PJM. PJM really is the most progressive ISO that we find with participating with batteries, and the most lucrative as well.
Okay. Here's a question that's really central, I think, to the whole concept of resilient power, and that we need to be able to answer. I think I have some ideas, but I want to throw it out there. The question is, how do you answer the question, why not just install generators? I'm assuming that this person is referring to diesel gensets, which are, the sort of old traditional standby technology for backup power.
This is John. I can take a stab at that. As I mentioned in the presentation, we actually serve as on ESF 12, so the Office of Energy helps staff the fuels part of ESF 12 during emergencies, and it is a very big issue trying to ship fuel during emergency situations. In fact, there are stories of tanker trucks actually being, for lack of a better word, hijacked. We'll send a tanker down to fill up a generator at, say, a hospital, but that tanker still has to make it to the hospital, and sometimes that doesn't always happen. And there's priority list on where that fuel goes during an emergency. It goes to first responders first, and then you go down the list. So in cases like ours, shelter is actually, not really at the top of the list. It would be first responders, and you have hospitals and things of that nature. So that'd be a quick response, I guess, to that.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump on that one? I think that Avital brought up, in her presentation, one good answer, which is that the diesel generator just is a sunk cost that sits idle until there is a disaster, whereas the resilient power system, in this case the solar and battery systems that we've been talking about, are running on a daily basis. So they're producing cost savings for the facility. They're producing income if you're using them to bid into ancillary services markets, as you're doing in PJM, or other types of income-generating activities, such as providing demand response and so forth. And that's a huge, it's been emerging as a huge impact, especially in PJM, but we're seeing, other ISOs and RTOs markets catching up with PJM, which is, making the difference, I think, financially for a number of projects. We just saw 13 projects funded in New Jersey at schools and wastewater treatment plants that are all planning on bidding into PJM. So, and that was just came out, within the past few days. So, it really does make a difference. And I think the other thing is that the diesels, first of all, are dirty generators, and secondly, they're not. They have a poor record of reliability, mostly because they're not run unless there is an emergency. So, I just, that seems to me to be a huge difference. Anything else anybody wants to put in on this one before I go to the next question?
Yeah, also just the DEP will sometimes limit the runtime for generators because of the environmental issues you just mentioned. And so this offers an additional backup power source.
Right, right. Okay, thank you. So here's a question that's a little technical. You mentioned the systems were net metered. Was the solar direct DC into the battery? Did you identify loads that would stay DC or convert all power to AC? Before we answer that, maybe somebody can explain what that means. What's the technical aspect of this that, you have solar direct into the battery or going through an inverter?
It goes through the inverter and then to the battery. So we're basically filling the battery first, and then whatever, most of the time what's happening is the school is, that PV is offsetting the school's electric bill. So, and I hate to say this, but I'm not the technical person on the project. I was like in charge of the education and the overarching program, and the person who really ran the technical aspect of the program has retired. And we have a new person, Dave Click, who is running the technical aspects of the program, and he has a new baby, so he could not be participating today. So, but I can get that answer for you if someone would like to email me, and I can provide that.
Okay, folks from Mensah want to jump on that one?
Yeah, sure. So AC coupling is when you have batteries and solar both produce DC energy, and then with AC coupling, they each have their own solar inverter, so you're not just passing the solar energy through the battery, and they're not sharing that one inverter. They actually each have their own inverter.
Okay, so the answer is doing the same thing. You're using the solar to fill up the battery, charge the battery, and then running things off of the battery.
No, you're not. The solar doesn't go straight through to the battery. No, it actually has its own inverter, so it doesn't have to pass through the battery. It can go straight to the site.
Okay, gotcha.
With AC coupling systems.
All right. So here's a question about cost on battery storage. What's the cost of the storage system, and do you expect it to come down significantly in the next few years?
So AF Mensah systems, so I'll take as an example again, that 1 megawatt project. So the cost would have been $3.5 million. The solar would have been about $3 million, and then the storage would have been the leftover. And yes, hopefully battery prices will go down over the next 3 to 5 years. So we hope to see the prices reduce significantly.
Okay, and what about the revenue streams you referred to in PJM? Somebody asked, can you assume that that's available for 4 years or more?
So we've been following the market pretty closely, and we believe that the prices will stay high over the next 5 years for sure.
Okay. let's see. Here's somebody asking about the schools. I'm assuming this is about Florida. Are the schools using the energy for peak shaving to lower their electric costs when there is no bad weather?
Well, it's basic. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say these are just net metered in, so you know, it's just netting as that system produces. It's just netting what the school consumes, and it's not on a they're being charged basically a flat rate to the best of my knowledge, so it's not shaving necessarily their peak consumption. It's just as available.
So it's pretty simple net meter. In New Jersey, are you guys getting any peak shaving benefits, lowering of costs or demand charges?
No, we're not focusing on that right now. There are other battery storage technology companies that focus on that, especially in California, but right now we're not focusing on that.
Okay, great. Well, as I said before, we're extending this just a little to get to a few more questions, and I appreciate everybody being able to stay on a few extra minutes since we did start a few minutes late. Any of these projects include public power utilities?
I'm not sure if I understand where they're going with public power utilities, but the SunSmart Schools program has utility involvement where they've actually put in funds to help install these systems in their territories as well. And most of those, I think, have been the investor-owned utilities. I'm not sure if that's correct.
Yeah.
Susan, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that is correct.
Can you give us a little more information about that? How did the utilities become involved, and what's the utilities' motivation, and how does that work?
Yeah, part of it is stems some of that, and that basically requires utilities to do energy efficiency measures, which solar was included in that as part of it. And then you know, I think in talking to the utilities, some of it's actually just it's PR. I mean, it's pretty good PR for them to put solar on schools. So I think that plays into it. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but that's just something I think I've observed. But Susan, you got more?
No, that is right. I mean, the incentive there is for them to, you know, promote themselves, and really this is one way to do that.
Sure. Okay, well, this is a question that I think everybody probably should jump in on quickly. It's several people that want to know what exactly is the resilient power benefit that is provided. Obviously, the Florida systems are a little smaller than the ones that we've been talking about with the Mensah folks in New Jersey, so the answer is going to be a little different. But what are you providing? You're supporting in Florida. The schools you're supporting, I think, lights and some charge points and maybe a fan, right? But no HVAC or anything large like that.
No, and really these were more demonstration projects and really an opportunity to show that it works. Mm-hmm. And we had initially proposed doing larger systems, you know, that would actually do an entire shelter, but the funding wasn't there to do that.
Right. So, but given that it's a demonstration project, so you're supporting some lights and the charging and so forth, and for how long approximately, assuming, you know, average solar availability?
Yeah, we wanted to be able to go 48 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
And in the schools in New Jersey, what's the answer to that question?
So we'll be able to support lights, HVAC, and plug loads. And then obviously depending on the size of the battery we put there, that will indicate how long the battery will last and the exact power that we'll be able to provide.
Okay, so that does include HVAC, but you don't have an estimate or a range of how long it might be?
Well, if we put 2-hour batteries there, it could be for 2 hours if they're using their HVAC continuously. If they're only putting it on for 20 minutes, it could last longer as well.
Okay. All right. So, so you're not. So the heating and cooling is. I mean, those are large loads. Assuming that they didn't want to run heating and cooling, how long would they have for just something like lights and charging?
Probably about 4 hours. And then
Okay.
additionally, something to remember, I mean, just taking Hurricane Sandy as an example, people were out of power weeks after the storm had passed, and so you can actually use your, when you couple battery storage with solar, you can actually still use your solar panel even when there's a grid outage. So the solar panels will be continuously recharging the batteries every single day.
Sure. Okay. So for the Florida folks, is there? You said there was a initial desire to do larger systems. Is there any possibility that you may be able to now, using this demonstration to show the viability, move on to doing larger systems?
I'll go ahead and take that because I have a feeling Susan was going to ask me the same question at some point. I don't know. We're still, ARRA was obviously a large influx of funding, and that's what we paid for the vast majority of that out of. So looking for funding for that is something, the project's been successful, and I think that's a selling point for it. But, I don't see anything at this particular point. And again, it's a good thing that they haven't been activated, but, in Florida they will be, and that'll be a great time to see how well these systems actually work for their intended purposes, outside of the educational components and things like that. So right now, basically, the answer is not sure.
Okay.
We did set those systems up, though, so we could actually go to some of the same schools and actually plus them up and make them larger, though.
Okay. Well, we kind of need to wrap up. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to wrap up this webinar. The question is, how the federal ITC obviously has been great support for solar, and it looks like it's ending, or unless something changes. If the ITC expires, how is that going to affect the business case for PV and battery storage systems? So let's start with Mensah. Was that a big part of the business case? Is it significant?
It's not a big part. I mean, obviously, it's a nice addition, but we still think that with the market revenues, we'll still be able to make this a profitable business case.
Okay. And in Florida, was the ITC even an issue, given that you had ARRA funding?
Yeah, this was, these are public facilities too, so they don't have, they can't monetize the tax anyways, really the 30%.
Right.
So that wasn't a big issue, really, at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody. I apologize we did not get to all the questions. We did the best we could. Thank you so much, Susan, John, Avital, Drew, Peter, Ajay, if you're on. It was a very good webinar, and it will be archived at our website. Samantha, you want to say something about upcoming events?
Sure, thanks, Todd. We do have a couple of upcoming webinars. Information about those is on your screen right now. One is this Thursday, one is next Tuesday, and you can follow those links, or you can go to our website, www.cleanygroup.org, for more info on those.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you at the next webinar.
Thank you.